Hey y'all, you're listening to the Legacy, Lyrics, and Life podcast. I'm your host, Shawna Wells, your legacy architect. Welcome. This is the podcast where we'll uncover what legacy really means and the impact we can all have when we are present. Let's get started. All right, y'all, I'm here with Patrick Jones, one of my favorite homies. So I'm glad to have you here because you're like the brother I never had on legacy and conversation and a brilliant mind. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Do I get a pew, pew, pew? There we go.
A little air horn.
Yes.
I have not gotten the update most recently on what is the legacy that you are aligning towards.
In the broadest sense, it is to give back to my community. And when I say community, I mean the Black community, in a way that provides sustainable change in the positive direction, right? And the way I do that now is through math education and through a scholarship fund that me and my family run. And so from a math education perspective, I was a math teacher, computer science major when I was in school. And in working in some of those spaces, I do see the barriers that math is. And I think a lot of times in education, this isn't necessarily Black education, but in education, we pretend that math is not a barrier. We tell kids like, hey, you can be an engineer, you can be this and you can be that. And we don't get them the type of actual math training that they need. That's just a large swath of the US population, right? But in addition to that, in the Black population, we are really not in tune with what it takes and the resources that are in place to get kids to this level. And what I mean by that is math competitions. And competition math is the predominant problem-solving mechanism that folks use to get into those spaces. Coding competitions and things of that nature, because of the types of problems that are asked in those spaces are the things that get you ready. And so I have a goal that I've just taken on, that I am going to impact my community by creating joy around math, creating opportunities to train around math, creating opportunities to master mathematics, and then creating opportunities to create new knowledge around math. And I want to start with predominantly K through 3 students, but I provide joy opportunities for K through 5. And the resource we do that with is a property we call Exponentia Prime. It started as a storybook of a Black girl who is a phenomenal mathematician, and she can travel between math worlds. And it's an amazing story. We have book 2 possibly coming out this school year. We have an expansion to the Exponentia Prime world dropping this August. And that story is called The Quantum Slugger. It's about a young man who plays baseball who invents different ways for baseball bats to exist so they can hit more home runs. And he uses physics to do so. So kids learn about angles and exit velocity and things of that nature. And so we want to make sure we're giving kids opportunities to have joy around math. We believe, and I believe, and I've seen students react to this, that learning that starts with joy is sustainable. But if it's devoid of training, that's when we have a situation where kids really don't have the skills to move on to the next level of that particular topic. So there has to be joy to get kids in a sustainable place where they can say, I want to do this. And then we get to training where it is a particular skill. It is a gift for some people, but for most people, it is a skill that has to be trained. And then we master that skill. And then we move that mastery to creation of new knowledge. And so Exponentia Prime is that thing. The other thing is my wife and I are both graduates of Fisk University. We went to an HBCU. We're big proponents of HBCU spaces. And so we have a $1,000 scholarship that we give to an Indianapolis resident who is heading to an HBCU. We give 2 out per year. And if I were to put another tag in here, everything has to be strategic from a standpoint where you connect multiple pieces to your dream. Right? Your legacy can't exist in and of itself. And so my kids are on the board of this nonprofit, of the scholarship fund. So we literally have retreats and meetings where my kids have to make decisions on who gets the scholarship. They have to read the essays. They have to understand the backgrounds, understand what colleges they go to. And in Exponentia Prime, We hire young people through the summer to create math items for some of our books. We have 3 young people working for us right now. And then we also have events called math circles. And that's math circles are really quite common in competition math spaces. And so we create math circles for K through 5, and that's our joy activity. And we hire middle and high school students to help work those events, teach them leadership skills of, what it means to get a kid interested or show a kid how to play a game. It's a family event, so parents are there with the kids who are at the event. So they're also like working with the parents. They're running the prize tables. And so that's all a part of the legacy. Everybody has to be involved.
I mean, what I love about you, Patrick, is that you've built this ecosystem around the legacy that you're aiming to leave, right? You've involved your children, you've involved community members. So Patrick is in Indianapolis. It's like he's the mayor, right? And like there's this element that you talk about, the unique trait you have is joy, right? Like there's this element of joy just about how you are aligning to and living through your legacy. And so I have so much curiosity around what it felt like when you discovered your legacy.
That joy thing has been curious because I don't think I've always been there as a math teacher or a parent. And I say that to say, like, my own kids don't want to learn math from me, but they will go to the math circle and work the math circle and walk away saying things like, Dad, that was actually pretty fun. Like, that was good. And I'm like, man, how come I don't get responses like that as a parent? And I get to contemplate on, like, I get to like adjust my parenting to like, man, I want to have more joy with my kids too. But what I recognized is joy has to be a part of our journey here, because what we can't do is just train. And I say that because I learned this from actually other cultures. When I talk to folks who are primarily immigrants to this country and they get involved in math competitions, so folks from India, folks from China typically these folks, the folks that I talk to, live in affluent parts of the city because they're generally engineers and their kids are involved in these math competitions. I'm asking them about their experience because I want Black kids to have the experience that some of their kids are having. So I'm trying to replicate some of this stuff. And I'm asking them, how are they getting their kids involved? And they use many of the techniques that I would use as a parent, like kids got to do it. They got to sit at the table and do it. You can't, you got to have dedicated time. It's very structured, right? And what I realized is this: it wasn't that the time was structured. It wasn't that they were diehards for this stuff, right? This is very important. Nothing else is more important. Like, I know Black families like that. It wasn't just that. What it was it was in the culture. That was the difference. It was in the culture. We just become doctors. It's kind of like Black people love music. Like, Black people love soul music. That's in our culture. This idea that these groups of people were engineers or doctors or good at math was a part of their culture. It was not an innate thing. It was something that had been embedded in them over the generations for whatever reason, right? We can say it's because when you're part of an immigrant culture, you come to another country to make it, give yourself an opportunity, then it becomes a part of your culture. However it became a part of their culture, it was a part of their culture. And so then my thinking became to be, well, how do I create math as an opportunity to be a part of our culture? How do we make it so that it's in the water? And I'm not saying everybody has to be an engineer. What I am saying is that this fear around math that exists in our households, that exists in our lineage, has got to go, because it is such a barrier to becoming a part of the nation that is so sustainable. When we look at technological advances in our country, when we look at who owns now a lot of those patents, who owns a lot of the technology, who gets to make decisions around a lot of the technology, who owns medicine, who owns financial services. If we're talking about equity, this conversation has got to move beyond, are there Black kids that are pictured in the school cafeteria? I want to talk about, do we control financial institutions?
Let's talk about that. So what makes that important to this legacy?
I mean, my journey has been long with that. The first book I read around thinking that Black people needed to control their own destinies was really like speeches and thoughts of Marcus Garvey, right? Thinking like Africa is for the Africans and just ideology around that. And then I read a book by Dr. Claude Anderson called Powernomics, essentially stating that, races in this country are in a pretty much a competition, is kind of how he describes it. I don't know if I subscribe to that wholeheartedly, but I do think there is something to be said for, our group is historically at least past a certain level where, blacks were the highest, were the fastest gain of literacy of any other group in American history. The fastest gain of numeracy of any other group in American history post-slavery. But after a certain time, that has all stopped. So I'm looking at this, and like, while I don't subscribe wholeheartedly to this idea of competition, I do see that if it is a competition, we are grossly losing and unprepared. And then I read The Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson, and he starts identifying power structures. He starts identifying particular power pillars, I guess, if you will, in a similar way Dr. Anderson does, but his research seems to be more in depth. He particularly talks about the role of power in all of this and the role of leadership. And one of the things I thought about in reading some of these is like, money is one of the things. And I think a lot of times we focus on money and financial institutions, but the role of financial institutions honestly has nothing to do with money. When you talk about math, you need the mathematical skills to understand like how to play the game, because the game gets a little complex and you need people to predict and, do all the things. But what I noticed is the role of the money in the financial institutions was really about power. And that's what got me thinking. It's like, oh man, if we don't start controlling the preparation for some of this, then we don't prepare our kids for power. We don't even prepare our kids to work in the systems that have the tools of managing the power. We're just subjects at that point. And that's where, like, when you get deeper and deeper and deeper, that's what really drives this, right? This Africa for the Africans mentality, right? Even Africa is not for the Africans right now. And certainly African American communities are not for the African Americans. And so then how do we change any of that? And some of it was with money and having capital. You got to have those things, right? But those are the tools. So then what lies underneath that? All types of other things. Social capital, preparation. Do you have people with the know-how? And I look at my role as an educator in life, and how do I play my part? I was really good at teaching kids math. So how do I become the catalyst there is the question I have for myself.
This is fascinating, right? Because we have all of these things that inform our legacy. And you've picked up words from other people, right? You've thought about, and like they pushed you to think about ideas like power, which frankly, we're not taught to think about. And you talk about this idea of tools. But like, why is it compelling to you? Like, what is speaking to you about this idea of power and legacy?
One of the things I think about when I think about the word legacy is, I mean, quite frankly, and this is, you can consider this like an egotistical statement, but like, what type of stamp do I want to have on the world? What do I want my grandkids to think about, right? I'm extremely proud of my parents. My mom literally would dig in trash cans behind our elementary school to make sure we had things. She stocked our library with free books that schools threw away. We had whole encyclopedia sets at home, and I would straight up read them because I'm a bit of a nerd, Shawna, right? And so, like, the thing that I think about is my mom literally started volunteering at the cafeteria of my brother's school and would literally bring home school lunches, and we would eat those for dinner a lot of nights. Long story short, she got a job working in the cafeteria, then became like a school security kind of person, like the person that used to walk around the school making sure kids do what they're supposed to do. And then she ended up becoming a 911 operator for Compton School Police. And she just retired from that. But I say all that to say, like, that's the legacy that she left for me and my kids. And so when my son is doubting himself or is not doing everything he needs to do in school, the conversation immediately goes to, your grandmother is not busting her behind. Like, you ought to know where you come from. Not to mention, my mother is from Tulsa, Oklahoma originally. And her mother is from Tulsa. And her mother is from Tulsa. So when you talk about even that legacy, boy and girl, for my daughter, you will do everything to make your lineage proud because they've just been through too much for you to like squander this. And I understand like there are life's growing pains. My father is from Galveston, Texas, the last place to hear that the African American peoples in those communities were no longer enslaved, which means like he's been celebrating Juneteenth since before I was born. And I remember him, telling stories about, yeah, we used to go to Texas in the summertime. So it's odd to see the country like making the tide. And I'm not sure how I feel about it exactly, because that means also it's becoming a commercialized holiday. I always have thoughts about that. And I also get to let those feelings go and just enjoy. Yeah, just, thinking about what my father went to the Navy. He was the first person in his family to graduate from high school. He was mathematically gifted. He became a jet mechanic in the Navy, traveled all over the world, and met my mom. But he always instilled this idea of a love of math being cool, it being good for you to be good at math. Like there was a culture in our household. He moved back to Galveston before he passed. And before he passed, he went back to school and he got his bachelor's degree in mathematics. And at his funeral, I was pretty much like looking around, and they were like all these 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. And I'm like, who are these people? I didn't know where they were from. And I started asking them like, hey, how do you know my dad? And he went to Texas Southern University. I was like, how do you know my dad? They said, I went to TSU with your dad, and he used to tutor us through our math classes. And to see him creating his own legacy, I know that my hopes, dreams, desires are in there, and that's what drives it. But it's also a carrying on of the torch of my parents' legacies as well. It's all embedded in there because I believe, our desires, our hopes, our legacies are this thread that we're like casting out into this fabric, this weave that we're all making, right? And I tell people all the time, I didn't come up with this idea. It's a guy named Brian Swim. He's basically like, after we cast all of these desires, these threads, it creates this fabric that we can all uplift humanity with. And that's just really important to me. I have to do my part. If I don't do my part, we all fall.
What's beautiful about this is like this moment, you and I on this podcast talking, is the result of a millennia of decisions that have been made by our ancestors to bring us here in this moment, to weave together the fabric that you talk about, right? And so what I'm hearing you say is, okay, it was my parents that really helped inform my legacy. They built this community, this culture, this conversation, and the actions that were connected to it. My mom in her way, and my dad in his way. And I'm informed by a set of deep practitioners who gave us the gift of writing, right? To see what they're thinking, to inform my own legacy. And now the legacy I'm living today is also informed by my children, by my community, by the things that I choose to take up. And so, Patrick, maybe as like a last thought exercise here, what are the things that seemed contrary to your legacy, but really affirmed this is actually the legacy I'm aiming to leave?
That's a tough one. And I say that's tough, and I'm going to answer it, but I do want to explain why I say it's tough. It's tough because I've been learning to live in possibility, which means nothing could be against my legacy. It's another iteration. It's an additional color to the thread, is all it seems like, right? A no really is like another branch masquerading as a no, right? It's really a yes that just looks different. And some of the things that have been contrary to the dream is like, one, Exponentia Prime started off as a book. And it's just like, it started off as one thing, and I want to sell books and I really work hard to sell books, but it's really about creating this culture. And I think like whatever I have to do that is what I'm going to do. So that might be math circles. Say something else springs up and that's how I choose to do it. Then like I can abandon the math circles because it's really about creating the culture, and I'm open to that. Or do the math circles and the other thing. Whatever the universe sends my way to create a culture of math love and achievement with our people is what will happen. And so I think like it's hard to see the book as a barrier, but I think that's almost one example because it's so much bigger than a book. A book is one mechanism to get the job done.
I love this example, right? Because the book, you've heard me say this about BS for Black Brilliance, the book is just an agitation tool, right? Like, surprise y'all, it's not about the book, right? It is about a conversation that, as you're talking about, needs to be woven into our culture, right? We expect that you will honor our brilliance. We expect that you will say, America's next physicians will be Black, right? Or America's next mathematicians will be Black. We expect that, right? And as we expect it becomes. And this idea of it's all about possibility. And if I get confused about focusing on the book instead of focusing on the legacy, I'm going to miss out. And so it's a beautiful articulation, Patrick, of helping all of us understand sometimes the thing in front of us isn't actually the legacy we're aiming to leave. And if we can get clear on like, this is the thing I came to do, then it helps us make decisions around possibility and abundance that are beyond our wildest dreams and our ancestors' wildest dreams, period, right? Your mom did not have the time to think about legacy beyond her children, right? This generation, we get to do that. That's the gift that we've been handed. And we're going to either do something with it or we're not. So thank you for taking those bars. Okay, so tell us, I've been curious the whole time because I know that you are steeped in music. What's a lyric or a set of lyrics that has informed your legacy or speaks to you about your legacy right now, today?
It's got to be a set of lyrics. But anyway, so I'd say, so the first is Kendrick Lamar. It's from a song called The Heart Part 3. He always talks about being compared to Pac all the time, Tupac. And he writes, when the whole world see you as Pac reincarnated, that's enough pressure to live your whole life sedated. Find the tallest building in Vegas and jump off it, but I could never rewrite history from a coffin. And that line is one of the reasons why it's one of my favorites, because it was like his real like first foray into the mainstream, that album, which means like some of that pressure he was feeling, like I have to be successful on this album. And the pressure is thick, but I have to play big because I can't live out my legacy, rewrite history from a coffin. And so it just reminds me of those times where like, you've been through this, I hire a graphic designer, that don't work out, or I hired this person, or I tried this and that didn't work. When those times get hard and that pressure gets thick, that's not the time to give up because you can't do what you set out to do by giving up. Outkast, Liberation. It's one of my favorite songs. And just because of this line, I can't worry about what another brother think. That's liberation. And baby, I want it. Right. And sometimes people are going to be naysayers. It's just one of those things. You're going to have naysayers. You're going to have people who don't believe in your dream. And that's okay. You need a little tension to cast your thread. Right. It doesn't always work freely. The loom needs to fight against something going back and forth.
I appreciate you. And I have learned so much in talking to you and in our lifetime together. So I am glad to be a part of the fabric of your legacy. And I'm glad you are part of mine. Thank you. Where can we find you, Patrick, if we're looking for your genius, your wisdom, your math culture? Where can we find you?
Yeah. So we're on Instagram at Exponentia Prime. So a lot of people will say exponential. So it's exponential without the L. Exponentia Prime, and www.exponentiaprime.com.
We appreciate you, Patrick. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Shawna. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to Legacy, Lyrics, and Life. We hope you'll join us on the next episode as we continue to expand and explore life through legacy. If you know someone else who would enjoy this show, be sure to share. Always a pleasure. Until next time.